live now. Okay. There you go. You're live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, people, and welcome to the Gravelly Hill Ward Neighbourhood Forum. This meeting, can I just go through some preliminaries, and that is that this meeting is going out live. It will be recorded for future public record, and at some stage next week it will go out live on YouTube. We've got a couple of people are with us today, one of which is already here. That's Guy Chowdhury from the Housing Department, and we're expecting Councillor Sharon Thompson, the Cabinet Member, to be joining us shortly. My name's Councillor Mick Brown. I'm going to be sort of chairing tonight. I've got one question I want to ask people to ask already, which I might start off with Guy with, and then hopefully Sharon can pick up later. If people that are listening and have got questions, if you type them through, then I will actually read those out. So hopefully if people are ready, or if Guy's ready, since he's going to get the first question, we'll start. So Guy, we'd had a comment from a gentleman who's been living in Gravelly Hill for the last 8 years. He's been concerned about what he considers to be the significant increase in HMOs in the area, and the concerns that he feels have arisen over antisocial behaviour, drug use, and a general untidiness of the area. What, from your perspective as an officer, what do you think is actions that we can actually take to ameliorate some of this gentleman's concerns about the rise in the number of properties, HMO properties?
I suppose there's two issues there. There's one which is the growth, which we spoke about before, and just going back as well. So HMOs and supported housing, we just need to be clear about the distinction between the two. So a normal HMO is quite different to a supported housing HMO. However, you would probably not know the difference because they're family housing, which is turned into shared accommodation. So with HMOs, there is some degree of control because we're able to license them. There's some planning regulations that can be adopted around controlling conversion growth. However, if it's supported housing, which I'm expecting it is because of the large numbers that we've got in the ward, it's a lot more difficult to control the growth. So the work that we're doing at the moment through the pilot, which is funded by the government, is to seek to improve the quality of the provision and seek ways to influence the thinking in government around how local authorities and councils like Birmingham can control that growth. And I think the other issue that you mentioned was around the issues associated with the large numbers in a small area, which is if you've got a prevalence of antisocial behaviour, the general cleanliness and tidiness. So that's something that we can do a bit more about, because as I say, with the pilot, we've had just over £1 million worth of funding to look at putting in place an inspection regime across the city, looking to tackle poor providers that aren't managing their properties as they should be. The vast majority of the accommodation sits under what we call registered providers or housing associations, and those are regulated by the regulator of social housing. So what we do is if providers aren't responding to these complaints and dealing with it as they should be as a regulated provider, we can seek to escalate those issues. And I suppose it's strike while the iron's hot. So if you've got specific addresses and examples, if you let us know those addresses, we can distinguish whether it's a normal HMO or it's supported housing, and we can tackle regardless, we can tackle the landlords directly. We are making progress in some areas because we've not necessarily had the resources before to go tackling individual addresses and individual providers. But if people can, and if I put in the chat an email address that people can use to email addresses of concern, and if they can just put those addresses in and the types of issues that they're seeing, we can take that away and look into them.
That would be really great, I think, if you could do that, Guy. I think the other point I wanted to raise possibly is I think sometimes people don't distinguish between supported accommodation, exempt accommodation and traditional HMO and sort of lob them all together. So I think it's possible if we can get people some information in terms of the different sorts of accommodate. Thanks for putting that in. That's really useful. And I think the other point, from a personal perspective, I can think of a couple of roads where there's a mixture of supported and HMO type accommodation, and some of them are really well maintained and really well run, and some of them aren't. So I think it's not that there's a problem with one sort of accommodation. From my own perspective, I think it tends to be an issue in terms of how the landlord chooses to run that particular property, and if he's got an agency in there to provide support services, how they feel they're actually going to manage the people they've got in that particular property. So I wouldn't want to cast aspersions across an entire sector. I think it depends in terms of how each individual property is actually managed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to make that point, because there is a lot of good provision in the city, and they're providing accommodation for people that desperately need it and get that support. So obviously what we're trying to do is encourage those providers that want to be good to help them to be better. And that's again through the pilot we're able to target training, so we've got social workers that can go in and talk to them how to do good support plans. We've got community safety resources that can talk to them about how they're managing their antisocial behaviour. So yeah, you're right, it's got to recognise that there is good provision out there. So but we've got to tackle the ones that aren't necessarily providing or doing what they should be. And you mentioned obviously the particular agents that they're using, and we're keen to understand. That's why we want the addresses, who those agents are, because the registered provider might have 2,000 properties across the city and use a number of managing agents to manage the properties on the ground, and that's where there's a little bit of a bit of a weakness in the control that they've got over the day-to-day goings on the ground. So yeah, as I say, let us know the addresses of concern, what those concerns are, and we can include that as part of our pilot inspection work.
What do you think the city could do potentially in terms of benchmarking some of these good quality providers? So I can think of a couple of them in Erdington Hall, the Erdington Hall part of the wood, where they've made some really big improvements on properties in the last 6 months. And you'd be looking at these properties and thinking, that's a property I wouldn't object to living in, because they've really made an effort. And I'm wondering, what can the council do to sort of benchmark these people as this is the standard we want to get everybody up to?
Another good question. So again, some work that we've been doing over the last sort of 12 months plus is developing a quality standard that goes over and above what the regulatory standards state is required, which at the moment all it states is to get the supported exempt status you need to provide more than minimal support, which is quite a low threshold. So we've been developing a Birmingham quality standard which should be publicly launched within the next week or two, which sets out in quite a lot of detail the kinds of standards that we expect to see. Now it's not enforceable, but what we're looking to do is to get providers accredited, get them kite marked, so they get this accredited status as being a good provider in Birmingham, and that we can then work with referring agencies to only use those that's providing the good quality support in line with those quality standards. They're quite a comprehensive set of standards. It covers mainly around support provision, but also how that provider sort of operates as a supported housing provider generally. The government has also published something called the National Statement of Expectations, the NSE, which although is not regulation, it's clear guidance from the government as to how providers should be operating this sort of supported housing. And if people want to Google National Statement of Expectations, you can see the sort of detail that's in there. So that's the benchmark is against that National Statement of Expectations and Birmingham's quality standards. And we've been inviting and working with providers to get assessed and accredited against that enhanced standard.
Are you able to give us any details in terms of how that scheme's actually going to be launched, so people not only in Gravelly Hill but across the city are going to be knowing that this is where the council's at now and this is where it's looking to go to over the coming months and years?
Yeah, we're looking for it to be a public launch, so in terms of press, etc., and our website is kind of ready to go as soon as that launch is made. So people will be able to go and look on the website and see, see how it operates, and hopefully which providers are going through that accreditation process. Clearly, we've got a large number of providers. We've got a lot of interest from them so far. So it's going to be sort of a lengthy time to get all of them assessed and accredited, etc. Clearly, we want to try and get some of the big players done first. But yeah, hopefully people will see, you'll see details about it over the coming weeks publicly, and we'll get details of the website once it's up and running.
Okay. Right, now I think for people who are actually maybe listening to us tonight, I think Guy has to leave about 7:15, and we're hoping Sharon's going to be joining us fairly soon. I suspect she's been tied up with another meeting. So if anybody's got any questions they want to ask Guy, if they could get them in fairly quickly, because it's about 6:45 now, so we haven't got a huge amount of time before Guy's actually going to need to leave us. In terms of the quality standards, what sort of response you were actually getting from providers when it was initially put to them in terms of this is what we're actually looking to do as a city? What's their initial response been? Has it been positive, or has it tended to differ according to different parts of the city? Has it sort of played out, or has there not been any particular discernible pattern?
I don't think there's been a pattern as such. So going back over 18 months ago, when we wanted to develop these standards, we invited all the providers in the city in for a bit of a session, because we wanted them to be part of developing what they should look like. And that initial session, we probably had over half of the units in the city represented by the providers that were around the table. Which was very positive, and we've got upwards of 30 of the main players that are now going through that expression of interest and accreditation process. So I think as long as we manage to get the large providers, we'll get a good coverage across the city, and clearly if we can get the referring agencies to only sort of use those good quality providers, and we've got that commitment certainly in Birmingham. There's probably some work to be done nationally to make sure that in terms of controlling any inward flow of referrals into Birmingham, which we know is potentially an issue. We need to continue to work with people like the criminal justice system, etc., and other local authorities, so that they're aware. And the pilot's helping us do that, because we're sitting at the table nationally with the ministry and with other authorities, and these are the sort of conversations that we're having, and I think there's an expectation that the learning from the pilot will help direct some of the policy type thinking around the future of that, but we know that's not something that's going to happen overnight.
You said you've been mainly sitting down with some of the larger providers. What's the position been with the small and medium sized ones? Because I can think of two small scale providers, and one of them has got 4 properties, and there's a pair of them side by side, and a couple of streets away there's another one, and they've done those up to a really high standard. My worry would be, would they sort of get slip under the radar in this process if we just concentrated on the larger providers? Because these properties I'm thinking of, they're exceptionally well maintained ones, and I wouldn't want them to sort of slip out of the process, because they're a small organisation. So I just wanted to know, how are they going to be kept in the loop, as it were?
Yeah, not at all. Every provider is going to be invited. So there's a letter going out pre the launch to every single provider, explaining how they can start going through, express their interest and go through that process. So we're not looking to lose anybody through this. We want to capture as many as possible, in fact. So, but if you do come across providers that that haven't got access to or haven't seen anything come out or haven't had any correspondence, again, point them in my direction, and we'll make sure that they get included in the process.
Would that be a sort of a central process, or would it be split down in terms of quadrants, or would it be split down in terms of wards? How would it be one major organisation that everybody was in, or would it be sort of a regionalised, localised approach?
So the quality standards will be sort of managed at a kind of a city level. So we're working with Birmingham Voluntary Services Council, BVSC, and they're working with us to coordinate the whole process, if you like. So it will kind of be controlled on a sort of citywide basis. However, we'll see as and when it goes through if there's any patterns around particular areas of the city that are not getting the level of provider accreditation against others, so that we can do some more targeted work. But yeah, it'll be primarily through BVSC, through overseen at a kind of a city level.
Okay. And then you mentioned earlier on in the conversation about some social workers going to be involved. Are you able to explain to myself and people listening what role they'll be playing and how they'll be working to improve the process?
Yeah, so the social work, we've got 3 social workers that we've brought in as part of the pilot funding, and they work within our virtual team, if you like. So we have an ongoing tasking process that when we either identify ourselves or we get issues raised to us around, it could be anything, whether it's the antisocial behaviour, whether it's the property standard, or whether there's a concern over the support, we will be going in first. And if we identify through that we've got concerns that the individual there isn't getting the support they need, there's potential safeguarding issues, whatever, then we've got the social work resource that we call on to go out and do that kind of more specialist care assessment work. Some of the benefits to that to date, we've found that some of the support providers have actually been quite upfront about they need a bit more upskilling around how to do care and support plans. So they have, been working with the support providers around improving their quality, which is something that we want to do as part of this, is improve the quality. So yeah, so that's what the social work resource have been doing.
Okay, could you ask a question about a couple of questions? I suppose one of my concerns is obviously with the pandemic and COVID and all of that, a lot of stuff is have to be done virtually. How much of a hindrance is having to do things virtually going to be in terms of implementing the quality standards programs you're looking to implement? Because obviously I would have assumed that it would be easier it would be more effectively done if it could be done physically. And I'm wondering how much of a hindrance having to do it virtually is going to be.
It has been a hindrance to date. The pilot was initially focused around doing proactive inspections, literally going out into the areas where we've got the highest concentrations, such as your ward, with providers that we've got concerns, and doing that more intensive proactive inspections. We've not been able to do that for obvious reasons. We have still been going out where we receive complaints or concerns, but we haven't been able to do the degree of getting out there and proactive, and that's something that we do need to do as part of the rollout, because we need to assess property condition. We need to reality check that the support provision is of a suitable quality. We're hopeful, fingers crossed, that we're moving over the coming months into an ability to be able to do that. So we will be looking, as soon as we're able to start going out there and doing that physical work, because that is something, whilst you can do some evidence gathering and checking virtually, you need to see it, don't you? So
absolutely,
yeah. So that's what we, as soon as we're able to, and fingers crossed that we're moving in that direction, we will be going out there. Yeah.
Okay. Then the second point I wanted to raise was in terms of the actual support that's provided by support providers. I was aware, and this was before the lockdown occurred and before the pandemic arose, where a number of the providers were providing the support virtually by telephone contact. Yeah. Now, I understand they may be having to do that then. What would you be looking for, and what would the social workers be looking for in terms of moving to more of a physical presence? Not necessarily that every contact between the support provider and the person that was being supported was physical, but at least once a week the contact would have been physical. I can think of a couple of properties where all the contacts were being made virtually between the support staff and the people being supported. And as I said a moment or two back, this was pre the pandemic. So for me, I'm a little bit concerned about, once things do get back to the new normal, that we're going to be expecting the support providers to be physically visiting the properties at least once a week. Would there be any expectation that they will be doing at least a mixture of physical visits and virtual contacts?
I mean, my view is that making a phone call once a week is not really more than minimal. And I think we've also got to make sure that the support, that the level of support and type of support is specific to the individual that needs that. So I would be, and obviously with COVID there have been some difficulties with providers, and that's totally understandable. But our expectation would be that the support would be more than just a telephone call, and it would be very specific to what support that individual needs. And clearly, if you've got examples where that's been the case pre-COVID and still to date, perhaps that's something you could share with us, so that we can have a look in terms of what within their evidence that they've provided through to the benefits service, that sits alongside what they're saying that they're doing, which I'm sure it is, and I'm sure there's good reasons for it. But again, the need to get the on the ground intelligence is important to us.
Right. I think with the cases I actually was thinking about, I was actually able to speak to the support provider and the support provider's line managing team, and we actually got them to actually implement a system in terms of, we're actually going to be going out physically. I think we agreed that they would do it once a week rather than every day, so at least the property would be seen. And I suppose I was just a little bit concerned that they didn't think they should have been doing that anyway.
Yeah, I share your concerns on that one, and again, perhaps we can talk outside around any specific examples, because we'd be keen to look at that. But clearly, if they've started, moving in the right direction through your intervention, that's good. But clearly, if support isn't being provided, to the degree that it needs for that individual, that is something that we do need to know, and that's where not just in terms of the benefit service but the social work team can go in there and start supporting the support providers to provide that level of support that's needed. Too many supports in there, I think, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Hi, Councillor Brown. We've got 4 questions in at the moment. If you look on your screen and there's 2 speech bubbles, I've published them so that you can read them.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty accessing that at the moment.
Okay, would you like me to read them?
If you could do that, would be good.
Okay. Where will I find the Birmingham Quality Standard is one question from a resident.
So as I say, that should be published via the launch, which will hopefully be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So when we launch it, it will go live on the website. That's the intention, fingers crossed. So people will be able to see there what the degree of support, the enhanced support, looks like.
Okay, and the next question: how big is the team that will be doing this work?
So the bid that we were successful was for, we've got a team of 10 generic inspectors, if you like, which are sort of the frontline inspection resource. But sitting behind that, we've obviously got the social work resource. We've increased the benefit service review team by 5 to undertake more in-depth reviews into benefit claims. We've got a smallish team of community safety officers that are working on with the police on any issues around organised criminal activity, and that includes a seconded police resource as well. Another key element of the pilot activity, which I haven't talked about, is we need to do a proper strategic needs assessment for supported housing, so that we've got a real clear understanding of what the provision is providing, the types of individuals it's providing it to, where the referrals are coming from, to really bottom out what the real need is in the city, and that will lead to a formal supported housing strategy for the future. So it's not lots, bearing in mind we've got over 20,000 units. We will be sort of targeting areas where we've got some of the highest concentrations, and we will be using it to support the rollout of the quality standards work as well. So clearly your ward as one of, I think is quite high up there in terms of numbers, will hopefully benefit from that.
Okay, and we've been joined by Councillor Thompson, so thank you. Sharon, forget to understand you unavoidably detained. And I think she's still on mute at the moment, so we'll carry on with the questions. I think another question we've got here, Guy, is please would you give an approximate cost to individuals stroke the department of living in supported accommodation, exempt and regulated accommodation?
So for support accommodation, it can vary depending on the degree of intensive housing management that they have to put in place to provide that supported housing, but it can range for anything between £200 and £300 a week for that enhanced benefit claim. It's important to note that although they will need to demonstrate that the individual needs support and that they are providing support, that the enhanced benefit doesn't pay for the support itself. It pays for the increased housing management costs that they have to put in place to deliver that type of housing, if you like. In terms of what a normal HMO unit would yield, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but it would be less, probably quite a bit less than in supported housing arena.
Okay. So thank you for that. We got another question here, so I'll read. This is a little bit complicated, so I'll read it out, then if you want me to clarify it, I will do. So it's, am I wrong in believing that for registered HMOs, the monthly rent for a single room ensuite, including in council tax, internet and bills, is around £450 a week, £450, whereas for supported accommodation, it's around £250 per week. Have you got all that, Guy?
Yeah.
To go it again.
Yeah. So no, I think I kind of got the gist. It's just so the same. So for a normal HMO, somebody is paying per room £450 a week, which seems well, for starting to go way above the local housing allowance rate. So I'm assuming
I think
that it wouldn't be covered.
Sorry, can I just interject there, Guy? When you read the question again, it's the monthly rent for a single room is £450. So I think it's £450 a month versus the £250 plus per week. Per week,
yeah. So that's probably correct then, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I was thinking £450 a week, and then I was thinking that seems yeah. So that makes sense. £450 a month for a normal HMO room sounds possibly about right, albeit I still think that's quite high, as opposed to £250 a week for supported accommodation, approximately.
When you said the £450 was possibly a little bit high, what would you have imagined an average figure would have been? How much above that the average you think that is?
I mean, it will vary. It will vary across the city in terms of areas, but for a single room, I wouldn't like to put a figure out there until I know exactly what it is. we've done some mapping of private rental markets across the city. Doesn't necessarily tend to focus on specifically HMOs and single rooms. It just, to me, feels a bit high, but I may be proven wrong on that.
Okay. Right, so those are the ends of that. Those are the only questions we've actually got at the moment. So thank you, Guy, for answering that. That's really appreciated. Sharon's made a really timely arrival because Guy's got to go in about another 6 or 7 minutes. So you arrived right on time. So Guy, unfortunately, been given us a bit of a tour de force in terms of what the council's actually looking to do in terms of getting quality standards set up, in terms of working with providers. And he was talking about the number of social workers he's actually got involved and the support they're getting for government. Do you want to sort of, for the people that are listening to us, do you want to build up a bit on that for us, Sharon, so residents are aware of what the council's actually looking to offer at the moment?
Yes,
and what you're looking to do over coming months and years? So
I think a lot of the things around exempt accommodation, it's been, as Guy would have explained, is more so out of the council's domain in terms of regulations and rules around that. But it's been really clear that it's having some not so great. Exempt accommodation is having a huge effect on local communities. So for us, whilst we acknowledge that there is a need for supported housing and we'll always support those that need to go into it, and there are some really good providers out there. The key thing for us is we want to drive out poor practice and bring practice up to a standard, and that does mean us working more closely with some of the agencies, which I'm sure Guy would have touched on. So in terms of me, in terms of as a cabinet member and a politician, we've been in meetings with the social housing regulator, chief executive, looking at how we can work better with them so that we can kind of, they're not in Birmingham, so we can start how to feed in information that's coming through, that's coming to us. Guy would have given you the operational, but we're also raising our concerns with ministers around some of the legislative standards, because that's what a lot of the problems are for us. So some of the things that we have been raising with them, which has come through from what local people have been telling us and what we know, is one definitely around the standards for more than minimal, because what does more than minimal care actually mean? It's so woolly, it's unbelievable, and it's not fair on those that are living in there or those that are living around it. We're calling on asking for some consideration in the rules to do with antisocial behaviour itself that may surround a property, because we need to safeguard local communities from some of those issues that are taking place. And the police tell us they want more powers to be able to do something. Their hands are pretty tied as well. And Mick, you will know that from some of the stuff that comes up in your area. Yeah. We're also pushing as well to ask for them to be more enforcement around people placing people from different areas and moving people from one area to another, particularly bringing people into the city that are not from the city. And a big bear bug for me is around the definitions of what exempt is, and we are really pushing and really writing to government and asking them to consider making the planning laws around exempt accommodation the same as the planning laws around HMOs, because selective licensing, we're going to be looking at that this year, but exempt is exempt from that. It's exempt from Article 4, so we're really going to be pushing on that. The scrutiny review's taking place, and we really asked people to come forward and share their information stories from local communities. And the reason why we went down that route with the scrutiny was because the pilot was so specific on some of the stuff around the providers, and there wasn't really room to gauge the bit from local communities, and we didn't want those voices being lost. So all the information that comes through and the recommendations that come from local people, they will be fed directly to MHCLG and the government as part of our evidence base of what we need moving forward. Guy would have said that they've said we can extend for a short period of time on the pilot, but we will also be looking at structurally within the council our resources and what we might need to tighten up in different places, and we're hoping that that will come out of the scrutiny review. I hope that kind of gives you a bit of an insight to where I'm at with it, Mick.
Okay. What sort of feedback are you getting from Parliament and MPs in terms of what timescales they will be thinking of in terms of any potential changes?
So what we're getting back at the moment, so because of the massive change, the massive things that we need in terms of legislation, Shabana Mahmood is leading for Birmingham on that conversation with kind of like national and lobbying. Steve McCabe's done an excellent piece around pushing for a bill when it comes to the DWP, and all the other MPs have had an involvement. The actual ministers themselves, and MHCLG, what they're actually saying to us is what they want to do is they want to get to the end of the pilot, work with the 5 local authorities to see what's come back from it, and then start to assess the situation then. So really that would have started, there's ongoing conversations throughout, but the real work would have started at the end of the financial year. But obviously we've extended the pilot because of the lockdown measures. So we're hoping in the next 6 months or so, we should start to hear more from them. They're showing signs that they're interested, but whether it goes as far as we need it to go is going to be another question.
Okay, thank you for that, Sharon. Then the other question that sort of comes to mind for myself is, I think I'm glad you mentioned that the work that the police do. I think the police do some really valuable work in terms of interventions at a local level. I think I've noticed in my ward, and this may be replicated in other wards as well, that the police will deal with incidents as a collection of individual incidents, say at one particular property. We'll go along on Monday and we'll deal with that issue, then we may be back the following Tuesday and we'll deal with that issue, but they don't seem, from my perspective, to join them up collectively. What work do you think we can do with the police to get them to see as a collective issue with this particular property, rather than just a collection of individual issues at that particular property?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 different ends. I think the first end I'm going to start with is that the police on a city-wide level are a part of the partnership, and they have always been when it comes to Exempt. I think they have difficulties the same as we do with any large organisation. What I've picked up from doing the roadshow is that in the neighbourhoods, the messages are not necessarily all filtering down. So we're having conversations with them about maybe putting on a session that invites all different police local police teams to feed into that, so we can have a collective conversation. Dave Thompson, the main person for the police for the West Midlands, he's put together some information for us, and we're looking at that through the scrutiny, which looks at it having spoken to all the different police across the region and stuff, and looking at it more objectively, and they've put forward what they think are recommendations that need to change. And then once we've gone through that process, we're going to look more holistically. So we want to look at the collective problems. So one of the good things that's happening from the pilot, which Guy would have said, is that we've seconded a police officer to come on that to look at it more strategically, so we can look at the organised crime as well as the neighbourhood crime that's taking place. So I think it's really about working with community safety, and John Cotton's going to be working with me on that to look at how do we build a picture, and once we've got that evidence, what it is we can do with it within the law at the moment. I'm not sure if that actually answers your question, Mick.
It does do, and I'm really pleased. Can I just mention one point here? I think, Sharon, that it's just turned 7:07, and I know that Guy's got to go for 15:15. So okay, if you feel you need to go, Guy, now that's fine, and I really appreciate you answering the questions early on. So thank you very much for attending. Yeah, I really appreciate
it.
Guy.
I can hang on for another 5 minutes in case there's anything else that comes out. Okay,
I appreciate that, but go when you feel you need to. I think it does answer my question, Sharon, and I'm really glad that we've actually got an officer that's been seconded to look at things strategically. I suppose from a police practitioner point of view, maybe I'd be thinking, if I've got an issue at an HMO or an exempt accommodation property, and then I know I've got to go to do something else after that, I'm just going to try to get that resolved now. And I just want the police to be able to have sufficient time on the ground, as it were, to put into resolving things more holistically than just putting a sticking plaster on things and then having to move off.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that we are going to start trying to work with the police. And when I said strategically, the officer that's seconded, there's almost going to be a bit of a triage team. So you've got the social workers, you've got the police officer, and then you've got the housing officers, and then you've got the people from the benefits team. So when they start to do the inspections, that they can pick up things that are happening in local communities and on the streets and try to work together about how do we collectively resolve these issues. And we're hoping that that model, that if it works, maybe it will help us to do things differently in local communities moving forward. The police, I know the police are incredibly frustrated because they feel like their hands are tied, because they are doing their best, and I think we're all in the same boat on that one.
Yeah, I've got every sympathy with the police, because it must be an incredibly difficult job they're actually doing. Over that, with the triage team, would that operate in a similar way to the mental health one, where they actually would, on the mental health team, an approved social worker will go out with two other people from the Birmingham mental health teams, and they're actually a mobile team. Would it work on that method, or is it going to be more of a virtual system? Or are you not sure at this stage?
No, so as part of the work that we've been doing to date, the sort of operational tasking, if you like, that we've got in place. So there's all those disciplines that we've talked about sit down 3 times a week and track what's coming in terms of concerns. So if we get a report about a property condition, our officers will, the frontline officers will go in first. If they pick up, and they've been, some headline training, if they pick up the concerns about the support or about any criminal activity, that's escalated and triaged through that tasking meeting. So then the social workers would pick that up and then potentially then do joint visits with anybody that they feel needs to be part of that joint visit, because sometimes we go into these properties and there's more than just one issue, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So joint visits are taking place on a regular basis and continue to do so. And I think moving forward, that's the kind of approach. And then obviously, the social workers would have access to those other specialist providers, whether that's mental health, whether that's substance abuse, all those sorts of support providers that need to be engaged.
Right, before you, if you've got a moment to stay, Guy, there's a question's been asked by a gentleman, which I was a bit late on picking up on, that you responded to a few moments ago. So if I read that out to you, it's having visited both supported accommodation, which costs £450 per month for excellent accommodation. I visited support accommodation, which is considered substandard. And what they're saying is, how can that be justified in terms of where we're at the moment? The differentiation between a really good amount of provision for that money and then something that's clearly not just, is clearly substandard.
Yeah, and that's so I think, as I was saying earlier, where we've got those examples that you're finding on the ground in neighbourhoods where you're coming across that substandard, is to let us know and we will go and visit it, because clearly attracting the higher level of housing management benefit should come with it a higher level of quality. And if it's not delivering the quality that they're saying they're doing through that housing benefit application process, we can do something about it. And we do, when we find that support isn't being provided, or they're not doing the level of housing management that they're saying they're doing, we will stop paying them the benefit service will stop paying them that benefit. And there has been some examples, where upwards of millions of pounds have been clawed back. So that intelligence is invaluable, and again, use that email address that I put out.
See, that's originally. The ERS one you put on earlier on.
Yeah. If you do that first, so that goes into the normal private rented sector team, and then what we do then is identify whether it's a HMO issue or a supported housing issue, and then it's escalated through whichever route it needs to.
Okay, well, thank you for hanging around, John.
I just think, Mick, it's really important just to remember that, again, because of the standards, the standard of what is meant to be for support isn't that particularly high because of they're only expected to provide more than minimal, and that's what they have to prove to housing benefit. But as Guy said, we have literally, you know, clawed back, and I think the quality, the Charter of Rights will make a difference, because those living in the accommodation will know their rights more, and the quality assurance framework will make a difference, because although it's not legally binding, so it's not mandatory, but it will turn off the tap for some of them in terms of agencies that are referring in. So if you're not signed up, there's a lot of agencies that will not refer into those organisations anymore. So we're hoping that will drive up the standards.
Yeah, because we were talking earlier before you wrote about the concept of benchmarking and having a standard in terms of this is what we in Birmingham would expect you're going to be able to provide. And we were talking about, I can think of 4 properties we were talking about in Erdington Hall, part of the ward, where this provider has made a huge, I consider to be a really significant investment in his properties. And that's the sort of property that I like to see replicated, not only across the ward, but across the city. And for me, it's a question of making sure as a city, we can encourage providers like that to come into the market, and for people that are already in the market to be aiming for that standard. So we're almost gold plating and saying, this is what we expect you to be providing across the city.
Totally agree.
Okay, we don't. We've got another question which has come in now. No, that's just. We just had, for anybody that's interested in getting in touch with the team, the email's been put up again on the chat, and that's prs@birmingham.co.uk. So anybody that's listening to us and has got a question or has got a concern about a particular property in the area, drop an email to the PRS team and they'll get back to you and look into it.
Can I just clarify, because I can't see what's gone up. It's so it'd be .gov.uk. So if .co.uk is gone in,
it's disappeared from my screen again.
So it's prs@birmingham.gov.uk.
My fault, Councillor Brown. I'm typing it from the one chat to the other. I'm correcting it now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Leslie, and thank you, Guy, for bringing that to our attention. And again, thank you for your efforts early on. I really appreciate the support you were able to offer and the information you were able to give to the people that were actually listening. I'm sure it's been really appreciated.
Good. Thank you. And yeah, I'll hopefully be in touch soon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right, Sharon, you're talking a few moments back about the work you're doing with other departments, such as John Cotton's team.
Yeah.
Are you looking to get all the various cabinet portfolio, or as many cabinet portfolios as possible involved, so we can have a holistic look at the way this support's being provided?
Yeah. So at the moment we've picked out the key ones. So the key one is there's Bridget Jones is involved because she's got the department. She's got the revenues and benefits. Councillor Paulette Hamilton's involved from the adult social care perspective. Ian Ward's involved from a planning policy perspective, and John Cotton from the antisocial behaviour perspective, and myself from more of a housing generic. So what we have is we have this sponsor board now, and 4 of us are on that list for that, and a minimum of 2 of us will be at any one of those meetings. In addition, because I'm leading on it at the moment, Ian's asked me to lead on it, and because it crosses across a number of portfolios, what I have been doing as well is I've been having one-to-ones with the cabinet members, so we've been able to talk through any issues that's been faced within the directorate, or actually have a cross-directorate conversation about for instance, something that might be happening in housing that impacts the benefit side of it, and to make sure that we're making those connections. So between us, we've drummed up a wish list for government that's based on all different portfolios, and we're trying to hold that holistic line. Okay.
I think it's really positive that we're looking to do something at a citywide level, because I think that gives a direction to where we're going. This is a question that we were talking about with Guy before you joined us, in terms of, well, I think it's important to have a citywide overview. I think it's also important to have a constituency perspective on it as well, because looking at Erdington as a constituency, the exempt accommodation HMO issue does tend to differ in different parts of the constituency. Yeah, and I'm sure that Erdington's position would be different to Sutton's, which would be different to what it would be like in Yardley and potentially in Northfield. So I do think we need to make sure we still got a local element involved in it.
I totally agree, and I think some of the MPs have set up sort of groups, and some councillors have done it. Some of them have been done at different levels depending on what the type of issue is and the impact. So for instance, I know over in Edgbaston they've got an Edgbaston wide residents group. Some will have a ward wide group, and then others have been based around neighbourhoods, and some of it's been organic because local communities have sort of come together on a street. So what I have said I would do is because one size doesn't fit all, you're right, Mick, it differs so much massively. So what I have committed to doing is at some point I will facilitate a meeting, or I'm trying to arrange a Zoom meeting with different reps from different community groups and councillors, so that they can come together and share what they're all doing in their different parts of the city, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what's the common frustrations, and maybe that can help to galvanise. What I don't want to do is be over subscriptive and be saying to different areas, you need to do it like this, because one size isn't going to fit all, and the issues that are coming up are very varied.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, and we've already had conversations with some of the other councillors in Erdington district, specifically in terms of Stockland Green, because there's a lot of similarities between Stockland Green and Gravelly Hill. In fact, until comparatively recently, part of Gravelly Hill ward was actually physically in Stockland Green. So I think there's a lot of potential for us to be working on a cross-ward basis, but I wouldn't want that to fit. I wouldn't want other people or the wards within Erdington district to feel that we'd set ourselves up as something totally separate and still like to have an Erdington-wide feel to it as well.
Yeah, I do think that's quite important, and it's just about us looking at who drives it and how it's driven. I think it should be more than just looking at it from a council perspective and a policing perspective. I think it's community groups, definitely, because they're, you know, living with it on a daily basis, and also local support groups and stuff that might be able to assist with some of the people, you know, joining events and clubs and things like that. So I think that's really important. But I do take on board what you're saying, and it is a good suggestion. So if you let me think about that, and sure, maybe you and I can work together to see how we could maybe form something like that, particularly for the Gravelly Hill ward, because I know that you have got some challenges over there.
Yeah, that would be great. So I'm really pleased about that. I think the other thing I wanted to say was in terms of what you were talking about in terms of community groups. Before the pandemic started, we were looking to do with tours a series of street events across the ward, which would have actually had a focus in terms of engaging people more with HMOs and seeing them as part of the community rather than seeing them as another, and for the HMOs to actually feel they were part of the community. Is that something, once the pandemic situation allows us to do that, is that something you're going to be looking to encourage?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for community engagement, especially when we're all sick of being in our houses. So once we can get out and kind of engage again, I think we're all looking forward to that. So I do encourage that. We've encouraged it in other areas as well, which not necessarily about HMOs, but in one particular area where we had a temporary accommodation centre, one of our council run ones, and you know, the churches came together and it was like, well, what is it that we can offer, or how can we give you information to share with those that are in temporary accommodation so that they can bring their children to the stay and play, or they can get involved and engage. So yeah, we will encourage people to do that where it's, you know, it's safe and there's not issues, and you know, when we have common understandings of each other, that's when things start to work better. And sometimes people behave in ways and they don't realise that what they're doing is having an impact on other people. That's the nature of people. So I will be encouraging more of that kind of community kind of engagement with people like that, regardless of whether it's HMOs or exempt or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good, because one of the things we were trying to do in Gravelly Hill, and I know they're trying to do in other wards across Erdington, is to redevelop a sense of community identity. And I think that's been sort of set back, as you're indicating, by the whole pandemic situation. And I know we've got a number of religious bodies in Gravelly Hill ward of various denominations that want to get involved in that. And I also think you're right that I think sometimes some of the issues that are caused by, in terms of antisocial behaviour, is not necessarily consciously deliberate. There's one property I could think of last year. Some of the men were outside playing football in the road because they got nowhere else to play, and they didn't necessarily realise the implications for neighbours when balls were being kicked up against cars or balls were getting into people's gardens. And they weren't doing it deliberately to cause trouble, but it did cause a certain amount of community friction.
Yeah, and you see that happen a lot, and that's why you know, I am keen for us to have a real kind of going back to that neighbourhood feel, really. And that's what I guess, aside from this, that's what localism should be about as well. So you know, any support that I can give you, Mick, then I'd be more than happy to do that. Yeah,
that's really good to hear, because I know a number of the religious organisations across Gravelly Hill are really keen to get involved in that, and I can sense that sort of feeling of frustration at the moment. We just can't get out there to make an actual difference in the community.
And it'd be good to see what other parts of the city where they've done that, and you know, the different models. I know Moseley, there's some stuff that's gone on in Moseley that's been really good examples. There's lots of examples across the city of way we bring people together. I always say food brings people together from different communities. It always is, I don't know why, but you know, hopefully when we can get out and it's safe to do so, and everyone's vaccinated who's going to be vaccinated, we should be able to plan to do more things in the summer moving forward.
Yeah, because going back to the sports stuff and the playing football in the street, it was interesting when people were told about these people that were playing football in the street and were causing a bit of antisocial behaviour. One of the reasons they were playing in the street was, even though there was a large garden at the back of the property, the landlords weren't giving them access to it. So had a small fenced off section which they could use. And I can think of at least one property where probably 3/4 of the garden wasn't available to those people. And I feel if that was opened out, it would have enabled them to have actually done something in the back. It would have enabled interactions to occur across the garden fence like they used to do. Yeah, and people would have felt that there was less disturbance on the front and more integration and more sharing in the rear of properties.
And just reflecting on what you just said there, Mick, maybe that is an action. There's an action for us to take away around. And you know, one thing is talking to residents about the impact they're having when they're doing stuff, but maybe there's something that we need to do to kind of communicate to landlords sometimes the impact of maybe some of their actions and their interventions has on wider communities. Because like you said there, if these guys had access to the back garden, they probably would have been in the back garden and not in the street. So sometimes I think we do need to do a piece around that with landlords as well, and I'll pick that up with the team about, you know, how, you know, what is the type of guide, or what is it that we need to put out to landlords to help them to really think about the impacts of things that happen locally. You know, yeah. A turnaround of a HMO with or a supported housing turnaround of a lot of tenants in there, and you know, beds get put out or things, you know, being dumped on the street, that has an impact on local communities. So I will take that away as an action point for us to think about how we could possibly do that.
Yeah, all I would say on that point, Sharon, the landlord, as I'm actually thinking about, when I pointed it out to him, he actually did something about it. I suppose I was disappointed that I had to point it out to him and he didn't seem to start off with. But when he actually did point it out, he actually moved the size of the bit of the garden that was open to them from 1/4 to 1/2. Yeah, and he's planning to extend into the other section of it to extend it even more. So I think landlords are willing to look at it. but you've almost got to remind them that that's what they need to be doing.
But Mick, you have to remember you're one of the proactive counsellors who will have a conversation with landlords. Not everybody does what you do.
I understand that, but the point I'm trying to raise, Sharon, is the fact that I'd have liked to have thought the landlord had thought that anyway, without me reminding him to do it. Yeah. In the same way when we're talking about support providers earlier on with Guy before you joined in, that you shouldn't really be making your checks on your tenants, the people you're supporting, by phone calls. And I understand why they would need to do it now because of the pandemic. But as the example I gave to Guy, that was happening pre-pandemic. And in my view, they should have been saying, well, we could do maybe 1 or 2 phone calls a week, but we need to be in at least 1 actual home visit a week to check it out. So I think it's also at the providers, as the support provide agencies, as well as the landlords, be a bit more thoughtful in terms of what you're doing and just take the easy route.
Yeah.
Because I suppose we're all capable of taking the easy route if we want, if it's available to us, but it's a question of thinking, well, that's the easy route, but what should I be doing? And I maybe needed to be trying to implement best practice myself, rather than having to somebody come along and remind me to do it.
Yeah, no, that you've got a fair point. And I think what I might speak to Guy about as well is because, like I said, there are some really good landlords out there and some really good support agencies out there, and maybe we should just, you know, put on an event for landlords and have the good ones really giving their good practice and examples and letting them network and speak, because I think that would be something of use when we're allowed back out, probably after the 21st of June. We should think about seeing if we can encourage them to do that or get one of them to take the lead in that space.
I think when we're all let out on the 21st of June, assuming that actually happens, people will be too busy doing stuff with their own families. So you'll have to give us a month or so to get back to.
I'll wait till September when we've all had the excitement of being out.
Yeah. But I think seriously, what you said about that, there's a couple of really small providers in Erdington Hall who do a really good job. So I'd actually like to see them sort of spotlighted, like in events that you're just talking about, so people can say, this is what we're actually looking to provide it for people who use this accommodation, not only in Gravelly Hill, but across the city. Because if these people can do that, there's no reason why other people can't do it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I definitely will take that back. Yeah, that's probably why Guy's still on the screen, just wondering what I've committed him to or committed the service to. But no, I definitely will take that back, and that's definitely food for thought. Yeah.
We don't appear to have any more questions come through on my screen. Have you got anything, Leslie, that you're aware of?
No, there's no more questions. I've just checked.
Okay, right. So
okay, great stuff.
I think there was one question I got emailed through to me earlier on, which I put to Guy, so I have to sort of repeat it for yourself, Sharon. And it was for a gentleman who's moved into Gravelly Hill about 8 years ago, and he just felt that there'd been a sort of a general deterioration in the area in terms of, I don't think he was specifically blaming the HMOs and exempt accommodation, but he just felt that the area had sort of deteriorated. So I think we do need to be having a cross-facility effort to actually improve the whole area, rather than saying, well, this particular area is going down because of HMOs, and not just label them as the cause of the issue. Because I think there are issues in terms of litter, there are issues in terms of fly tipping, in terms of in Gravelly Hill, as there are across the city. But I don't think I think it's dangerous for us to possibly just assume that's all the fault of HMOs. I think we all need to be aware that our community is our community, whether we rent from the council, whether we are owner occupiers, or whether in an HMO property. We all live in this particular road, so we need collectively to be looking after it, rather than labelling the problems on one person's causing them or one type of accommodations causing them.
I'd agree with that, and I think it's quite difficult with the HMO conversation, because exempt accommodation looks like HMOs, and I often say to people we have to be careful how we label people and that live in those type of accommodations. And I always give the example that, you know, in my ward, the ward I represent, we have a lot of HMOs and we have a lot of exempt, and in some of them HMOs, you know, we've got students, we've got people who work for the NHS, there's professionals, there's you know, there's a whole raft of people who get labelled as problematic because people are thinking of exempt, and then you've got some great exempt that you don't even realise they're on your street. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're in a council house, a private property, there can be problems. So I think you're right, and I think it goes back to the thing that you said earlier on about getting back to that whole community neighbourhood feel. Usually communities change as people move in and out of the area. That's when you start to know the changes. You know, someone's been living there for 20 years and you live next door to your neighbour who's been there for 15 years, and then all of a sudden that property, you know, someone's left and the property has a range of people moving in a short space of time. So we do need to get back to that community spirit, and look at and celebrate more of the best bits that come out of the community as well.
Yeah. I think it's also a question of not necessarily always looking for somebody else to blame for that, and for somebody else to actually to resolve it. So if we have got a litter problem, which there is in Gravelly Hill, which there is across Erdington, it's to be supporting organisations such as Erdington Litter Busters, who are sending out the message to say to people, why don't you look to adopt either your whole street or a part of your street, and collectively look to keep it tidy, not necessarily moving the large amounts of fly tip stuff, but the smaller stuff. Because I think if people see that smaller stuff's not been dumped, they're less likely to dump other bits of smaller stuff close to it.
Oh, I've lost you there. I lost you there a bit, Mick.
Okay, what I was talking about was in terms of, I don't know if you've heard of Erdington Litter Busters. They're an organisation that covers all of Erdington. It technically covers the entire constituency, although it tends to concentrate on Stockland Green, Erdington Ward itself, and then down into Gravelly Hill. And what we're looking to do is to encourage people to adopt either their whole street, or if it's a really long street, maybe just a portion of it, to be going out there and actually picking up some of the small litter items, the bottles, the glasses, the cups, etc. Yeah, not the larger items. So people actually feel this is a street that I don't want to drop litter into because it's too tidy. And if people get that mentality back in their minds, and I'm going to actually carry my litter until I find the nearest bin, I'm going to put it into there. It does improve the area, and I think people then feel more positive about living in that area. And are less likely to be saying this litter's here because of the HMOs, that's why the litter's here, and realise it's not, it's here because we put the litter on the floor, and we all put litter on the floor. It's getting that mentality changed.
It's like building up a local culture. That's what it is, and it's like kind of developing that local culture. And I guess, you know, sometimes if anyone's into, like, you know, going on holiday and stuff, you go to another country or you go somewhere, I think it's because I'm a counsellor, but one of the first things I notice is if there's no litter, if it's no litter, or I look at the housing for some strange reason, you know, all their houses are really nice around here, and because it is a cultural thing. And you know, you're right, once people feel that, you know, they don't see chewing gum stuck on the floor, or they don't see litter being dropped, it's more of a deterrent, and you do think, oh, I'll take that home with me. It's more something that goes into the consciousness. And I really like groups like the one that you're talking about, on the basis of, because it starts off with litter, where they're picking up the litter, but it's people, communities coming together, getting to know people, encouraging people to get involved, and you then start to learn other things about the street and picking up on other issues and connecting them into the council and seeing what else we can do. So I think it's a really catalyst of when it's a good example of when things can happen. And again, I do encourage that kind of model where, you know, the small things do make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's right, because one of the reasons I mentioned it was in two streets that I do know of across the ward, there are people from HMOs that actually are taking that role on. And I think that that's something that we should sort of be celebrating as much as the fact that somebody from an owner-occupier is doing it. It's everybody, and a variety of people from those roads are getting involved in it.
Yeah, it does, because and then I get that in my ward, with the ward I represent, that, you know, it starts off with the small things and then they get so much passion and other things come into it. So yeah, I think it's a great thing, definitely.
And it also enables people to see each other as people, rather than you live in an HMO, I live in a council property, you live in a housing association property. You see them for who they really are, rather than just the label you stuck on them. And that does help to build, or start to build, a bit of community cohesion.
I think so, and maybe we should look at, if that's something that you're angling towards, that, you know, that maybe we can look at something around that, around, you know, best practice and stuff, because it like you said, it's important. People are more than, you know, I always say the colour of your front door. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot more than that, and I think it is about bringing back that community spirit.
Yeah. Okay, we still got, I can't see any more questions. Leslie, have you got anything on your sheet?
No, there's no questions come through, Councillor Brown.
Okay, right. So so in terms of, we mentioned a while back about the triage teams.
Yeah.
Once the pandemic situation's resolved, assuming we can get that under control, how soon would you see them ever get into a situation where they followed the example of the mental health triage teams, and they were physically out there on the streets and able to come out to respond to problems, potentially with a police officer, potentially with somebody from the housing department, actually physically coming out to look at the problem collectively? Because I think one of the problems that the police have when they go out, they just tend to see it as a criminal issue or a disturbance issue, which they just want to address in terms of the law and order side of it, and the rest of it they don't really have the time to deal with.
Yeah.
And I think the triage team, if we could get that, a process, a system that actually was operational on the streets, would make the police's life somewhat easier as well.
So with that, I think as soon as we can get out of lockdown, that'll pretty much start. I think it's going to be a case, we have to be mindful it's not a massive resource. I've got to be clear on that bit. And also because what will happen is the teams will start to go out and do assessments around providers and properties and things, and they will flag up things, and it can go to the triage group. And like Guy said, that, you know, it's there, it's operational, but not on the ground. But also I'm very mindful of it's a part of the pilot. So once the pilot's over, we haven't got the money from the ministry, you know, we have to look at the resources again. So again, we're hoping that we can extend that, but having a mechanism that the police can come to us and say, you know, we've had this problem with this exempt accommodation property, but we've noticed there was this and this issue, which is not policing, but we want you to look at it, and really kind of strengthening the referral side of it between organisations and those that are working key players in it. Because ultimately you want to get to a point where, yes, we've got a triage system, but locally police officers and the housing officers can just automatically know what to ferry and have that kind of commitment to collaborate around it.
If we were able to show that the triage system was working successfully, how would you rate out the opportunity or the potential for getting the pilot scheme extended by government?
I mean, they've extended it a little bit of time already. We're going to have to keep lobbying them about extending it in terms of the financial. I'm conscious that it's only 5 local authorities across the whole country. The key thing for me would be for them to not necessarily just extend the pilot, but for them to mainstream some of the concerns that we're raising. So some of the legislation bits that we're asking for would mean that we wouldn't need some of the other stuff. And then also for them to give us some funding to local authorities so it's mainstreamed in. So, you know, we're paying out housing benefit, but there should also be money to make sure that there's, you know, the infrastructure's there, so to speak. So I'm hoping there'll be a little bit more of that, and they'll reconsider not the responsibility of the regulator, because the regulator is doing as much as they can, but just the way that that's resourced in order to support local communities as well.
And you mentioned we got buy-in from Shabana earlier on. Are we getting buy-in from the MPs across the city for it?
Yes, so we've got buy-in from all of the MPs, I would say, across the city, or constituencies. It's not so much an issue for all of the constituencies. There's some key constituencies it's affecting. Shabana's leading it for me because all 10 MPs are sort of have an interest in it, and you know that they're willing to be involved. It's a bit difficult trying to work with all 10 at the same time, if I'm honest. So Shabana's the one that I go to, and she kind of organises between them, but they all do take on bits that are more pertinent to their particular area. So you'll see that Jack tends to really give the modelling around the work that's been done around the Scotland Green group, and the Erdington side with the work that E4 Jones is doing and the others. And then you'll find that Preet has more interest around standards, whereas Steve's got more interest around the benefit side of it. So they've all got their little niches that affects in particular wards. Over in Khalid's wards and in Ladywood, there's a lot around antisocial behaviour. So collectively, they are getting involved and doing their piece. And you see a lot of it at the moment, not just in the press, but them asking questions in Parliament around exempt accommodation.
That's good. I mean, I think it's really beneficial that you've got 10 MPs and they've all got their own particular interest areas. But I think it collectively, I think organised, if you've got a bulk of people behind your organisation, in my view, you have more chance of being successful and get yourself mainstream funding. Absolutely. Because you've got the numbers behind you.
Absolutely. So and that's Shabana's doing that kind of organisation with the MPs, and I'm sort of doing a bit of that in the space around the councillors. We have been approached, you know, by as politicians. It has been raised about, you know, campaign in terms of, you know, around the more than minimal and things like that. So I think there'll be more things coming down the track, and actually local people, and always say, you know, yes, come to us as the council, but you know, there's nothing wrong with local groups also coming together and deciding that they want to write a letter to the Secretary of State as well. You know, we need as many voices as possible to kind of get to where we're aiming to get to. So the key thing is around this is that we don't leave communities behind in the conversation, that we try to change the bits that we can internally. So if there's anything we can do better, and that'll come out of the scrutiny review, but also be very clear on what we need others to change in their practices. And again, working with others, it's got to be, you know, we've got to work collectively with the police, we've got to work collectively with the health services, because we're all a part of the one jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, for me, this is one of the reasons we wanted this meeting tonight, and I'm really pleased that you and Guy were able to attend, is to give residents across Gravel Hill Ward an awareness of where we are at the moment and what our potential direction of travel is going to be, what some of the positives are, what some of the negatives are. But to say that this is not just something that we're doing, but this is something that the whole community can get involved in. Because as you're probably aware, there's a lot of connections between Gravelly Hill Ward and Stockland Green Ward, and it cuts across part of Erdington Ward. So it's something I'd like to see, to be looking at, to be running not 3 separate campaigns, one in Erdington, one in Gravelly and one in Stockland Green, but something that links the whole area together, because people don't necessarily see those divisions in the same way that we would do on the council. Well, that's the Gravelly Hill border, so I'm not interested in what happens on the other side of that, because people don't divide things in that same way.
And I think it's that thing that I think we've had this conversation, you and I, Mick, is you know, providers don't work on the basis of ward boundaries. So you'll have a provider that will have properties in Gravelly Hill, Stockland Green, Erdington, over in Ladywood, Perry Bar. And then, you know, if there's an issue maybe on a street in Stockland Green with residents, that resident may end up getting moved to somewhere in Gravelly Hill, and it just gets removed around the area. So we have to look at it on a wider scale, but not make the local areas, the issues that are facing the local areas, get forgotten within that. So we can't treat it like it's blanket, but we also do need to have that kind of cross-working thing. So I think it's really important, and that's what we try to do with the, that's why we asked scrutiny to take that role as well, so that we could pick up on some of that. So I do want to take the opportunity to just thank everybody, every resident and residents group that actually fed into that scrutiny evidence gathering, because it's, I know that some of the submissions that have been received have already been really useful.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm sure that people that have made submissions actually agree on, would be appreciative of the fact that you've taken the trouble to thank them from what they've done. So I think sometimes you can, if you're outside an organisation, you can pass a piece of information to them, but if you don't get the feedback, you're not quite sure what happened to that letter I sent in. Did something happen to it, or did it just get filed away and somebody's forgotten about it? So I think it's really positive that you've actually come on live and actually said this is what we've actually looking to do, and we appreciate the fact that people have fed into the process.
Yeah, it's really important that they've done that, and it's people's lives. It's like it's people's next door neighbours. It's the roads that they live on. It's the streets, and so, you know, so it's been really important. And like I said, we've had so many submissions and, like, you know, real ideas and, you know, issues and willingness to work with the council and work with other community groups on that. So it is really appreciated. It's you know, it's an issue that's affecting everybody, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. And then one point about what you said about people being moved around. One of the things we picked up last year, there was a number of people were being moved from other parts of Erdington where trouble was occurring across to Gravelly Hill, and I'm sure there's people that have moved from Gravelly Hill into other parts of the city. And what we've been trying to do is to work with some of the providers and the landlords and say, we appreciate the fact that you've moved this particular person because they were posing a problem, but it's a question of resolving why that problem occurred, so that when they move to the new case, they're not just moving the problem from A to B to C. We're actually moving it, but we're going to resolve it when it goes there so it doesn't reoccur. And I think sometimes there's been a tendency for landlords just to resolve that problem, say in Gravelly Hill, by just moving the person, but we're not going to do anything about it. To me, moving it just moves it. It's a question of taking some action as a landlord to resolve it. And I'd like to see that as part of the quality standards, there's a commitment from landlords to actually to do that, not just move the problem, resolve that problem.
Yeah, yeah, and it's got to be important, because it is that thing of you know, sometimes when there's a problem, and when someone's been moved because it's been problematic, it's the landlord's doing it because they want to quiet up the lady at number 21 because she keeps phoning up and writing in, and like you said, they just move it on, and it's, you know, they're moving on, you know, the same behaviour or something that's happened, and the next person they live next door to might just live with it but be suffering. So it is really important. One of the things that I am going to do, Mick, is soon as we launch the quality assurance standards and everything else, I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. We'll email it out to you, and just, you know, I'll be really, really grateful to hear your feedback on it as well.
Okay, thank you. I think the other thing that we do need to bear in mind, I think if there's a particular problematic tenant, yes, they're causing an issue to neighbours and maybe people close by in properties, but sometimes they can be causing a problem to tenants in the same house that they are actually in. So I think we need to remember, yes, it's going to impact on people in the immediate vicinity, but it also impacts on the people in that particular property. And I know, I can think of a couple of cases where people got moved, and the people in the tenancy themselves are saying, yeah, we're glad that's happened because their behaviour was impacting on us. So I think landlords and support providers need to be aware of the impact of on other tenants as well as the immediate neighbourhood.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, that's why I always say that sometimes you get they'll place people in a property and it's not necessarily a good mix. It's not a good mix. They won't get on. And one of the things with the Charter of Rights and the quality standards is I would like to see long term, not in the anytime soon, but long term, I would like to see us actually rolling that out into other parts of the housing sector. So the standards is something that people should, we should be adhering to a set of standards and principles, regardless if you're the council landlord, whether you're a private rented sector landlord, whether you're an exempt landlord, because we want people to have the same standard of experience. Because what people want is they want good landlords, regardless of who it is.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think just because they're in a supported accommodation or they're in exempt accommodation or they're in the HMO, it doesn't mean they have to accept an inferior quality provision. I think we do need to be saying they've got as much right to good quality life as everybody else does. Because if they have a good quality life, the people in the immediate vicinity will have a better quality of life as well. Because as I said to you, the people that live closer to some of what I consider to be the better HMO exempt accommodations, when people are talking about problems, they don't refer to those, and they don't refer to them because there aren't any problems from them. Yeah, and yet sometimes they can be slightly unsupportive of them. Say, well, that's a HMO, but yes, it's a HMO, but it's a well-run one, and it doesn't cause any problems for people in the vicinity. And the people that are actually being accommodated there are getting a good quality of care, which is what it should all be about.
Totally, it should be about that. And I think one of the things I'll do, Mick, as well, is I'll see if it's possible, because I know we've got it on a constituency basis, but I'm not quite sure if it's drilled down on a ward basis. But that's to be able to tell you kind of the housing makeup in the area in terms of on the ward. So you kind of know like how much percentage of the housing market is sort of bought properties, as in like people, owner occupiers, how many sort of like HMOs, exempt accommodation, whether it's housing association, with council properties. Because when I looked at it in some areas, it really did help me to understand why we were getting the type of inquiries that we were getting, and kind of bottom out some of that piece that you talked about trying to bring communities together. And actually this is just about people living in an area and that we've all got a front door.
Yeah. And also to accept that just because there's supported accommodation or it's exempt accommodation or it's a HMO doesn't necessarily mean that these properties are in this road, that this is a bad road. It's a bad road partly because of the way people perceive that road, and partly because of the way they interact with each other. It doesn't automatically become a bad road because of the type of properties on the road. It's the way the people in those properties of all sorts actually interact with each other and the way they feel about that road. Yeah,
it gets there can be an element of stigmatization, and that's was something we were trying to drive out, the stigma. Sometimes it was happening with council properties as well, so it is something that we need to drive out, is some of the stigma that's attached to it. And I'm hoping that once we get further with the pilot, that we'll be able to address some of those things.
Yeah. Okay. Are you still with us, Guy? Or is his photograph just still with us?
No, he's.
I am. You're on in the background, so I was just saying, but I am still with you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for staying on. In terms of the conversation that me and Sharon have actually had, is there anything you want to add or comment on about what we've been talking about over the last 10 minutes or so?
I'm totally in agreement. I think the work that we've got to do to try and put in place the sort of the quality improvements with providers, and I think that your point about, and Sharon's point about getting a providers event together so that providers across the sector are working collectively to put in place those improvements is key. Yeah. And not forgetting the smaller ones, which I know you've highlighted again. And I mean, the points you make around it's regardless what tenure you live in. You live in a community, you live in a neighbourhood, you live on a road. So it's how whether you're you're a housing association, council, tenant, owner, occupier, about linking up the work we're doing around this with some of Councillor Thompson's other areas around that localisation agenda, getting people engaged in that improvement agenda, then yeah. So I'm totally on board with everything you've been saying.
Awesome. I know we were talking about the small providers, and I know I may seem to be overzealous about the small providers, but I do feel that there's certainly in my world that the small providers are the guys that I really would want to be seen as the benchmark, because I've got there's some people that are really committed to providing a quality service. I think this perception that sometimes that field, it's just about the money, it's just about what I can get out of it. I think for some of the smaller providers, it's about, I'm not saying the money doesn't come into it, but it's about what I can give, the quality of provision that I can give to the people that are in my accommodation. And I think I said this before Sharon actually joined us. There's a couple of places in Erdington Hall that I'd be really happy to live in because they're really well maintained. And they look, when you look at them from the outside, you're thinking that looks a really good place. You look at it and there's no litter on the front, there's no litter on the driveways, and you're thinking that looks a really nice property. And that's what I want to see the quality standards emphasising, that's what we should be looking to get across Gravelly Hill, across Erdington, and wider out into the city as well.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to give the opportunity for those providers to showcase that kind of work in front of the others. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you for that. Leslie, am I right to think we've still got no new questions?
No more questions have come through, Councillor.
Okay, right. And we were due to finish, was it 8 o'clock tonight?
Yep, we booked it till 8 o'clock, yep.
Okay, right. So firstly, I'd like to thank the people that have put questions on. They've been really appreciated, and I hope that the answers you've got have at least partly answered answered your questions. I want to thank Guy for his contribution. That has been really valuable, and I really want to thank Sharon for being able to get on to join us tonight and explain what the city's looking to do collectively, because I think it's important for residents in any ward to know that this is the person that's actually looking to help make a difference in this particular ward. I think actually seeing the person and listening to them makes it a bit more real than it was if it's just, oh, this is just being done by Councillor Thompson, but we don't get any connection between them. I think the fact you've actually been here tonight, I've appreciated it, and I'm sure the people who have listened to us tonight have appreciated it, and I'm sure the people that pick up on the actual recording when it actually goes out on YouTube will actually be thinking, yeah, these people have actually got a genuine commitment to this. And I'm hoping that possibly later in the year you come back and we can do another one of these and show to people that's where we were back in February. This is where we're actually on now. And this is how we're looking to move forward again into the future. Yeah. So
thank you, Mick, and definitely thank you for the invite firstly, and for everyone that's listening in. More than happy to come back and speak to you again in the future about where we're at with Exempt, and actually Mick, any part of my portfolio.
I think we've lost you again there, Sharon, at least temporarily. I think that's the disadvantages for people who can still hear me. I think the disadvantage about doing things on these online formats is that you very much aligned to what your IT capabilities are, and sometimes you do get the situations where the system sort of freezes itself out. I understand from Leslie, she was saying to me before we went live that there's a potential for a new system to be coming in the spring, which will hopefully make it a bit more interactive in terms of people won't purely have to put a question into the system which we read out, and there's a potential for people to actually to feel they're actually part of the meeting rather than just watching something.
Yeah, we'll do that for the next meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the internet seems to have gone a bit haywire at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you, guys. I really appreciate what you've done. Sharon appears to have disappeared completely now, but thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for everybody that's joined in tonight. If people have got any additional questions, then please feel free to drop me an email, and we'll look to pick it up for you. And the address for, if you want to get in touch with Guy's team, I'll read that out once more. It's prs@birmingham.gov.uk, and I'm sure Guy's team would be really pleased to pick up any concerns that you've actually got. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and good night.
Cheers. Thank you. Goodbye.